Hello and welcome back. Good to see you again. Glad you could be with us. So we're looking today at the church at Smyrna. This is a very important church because it can tell us a lot about ourselves. And we really need to look at this with open eyes and open ears and open hearts. And so if you're not really ready to go to that place today, what I suggest is pause this video for a moment and pray and ask God to open your mind's eye that you could see the truth of yourself. And when I was going through this and writing this message, I had to do this. I had to know. I had to see myself as God sees me. So we're looking this morning first at what are you willing to suffer for Christ? And understand, I'm not talking here about when they get your order wrong on christianbook.com. Okay? That's not true suffering. Okay, what I mean is, what are we willing to do? What would we be willing to die for Christ? Would we be willing to undergo torture, persecution, beatings? Are we willing to give it all? Let's see what happens at Smyrna, shall we? We're in Revelation 2 this morning, verses 8 through 11. Now, this is the shortest message, but in many ways the most profound. Look what Jesus says. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. So look how Jesus presents himself to them. The words of him who is the first and last, the Alpha and Omega, who died and came to life again. Jesus here is focusing on his eternality and his power because he's about to speak a word to them that is going to be very difficult for them to take. So what he's saying is, hey, you can trust me. I was here at the beginning, I'll be here at the end, and every moment in between, I am here and trustworthy. Right? So when he says the Alpha and the Omega, that's what he's saying. Now when he's talking about being the first and the last, dead and yet alive, he's telling them, I am powerful. I was dead and yet came back to life of my own power. Every other person who has been brought back to life has been brought back to life by someone else, but not Jesus. He was brought back to life by his own power, the power of God. So he says to them, I know your afflictions and your poverty. So let's talk about this for a moment. First, affliction and poverty are not novel ideas. They're assumed. Jesus said that we will always have the poor among us. And sometimes, yes, it's true, it is us as believers who fall into those categories of afflictions and poverty. There's a very popular teaching going on out there in our world today talking about how God wants us to be healthy and wealthy and have all the material things and have all the trappings of the world. And for some of us, that may be true. That may be what God has in plan and in store for us. But it's important that we understand, right, that that's not for all of us. Some of us will be poor. We see, right, so much talk in our world about how can we do away with poverty. Well, the truth is we can't. And I don't say this, from an ideological perspective. I say this because we have always had poor people, and we always will. I mean, I grew up extremely poor. And it may be us as believers that endure this. In fact, in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, the writer of Hebrews sees no problem with it. In fact, he says many were poor. Many had nothing. Because what happens in this life has, at least in terms of our materialistic things, has nothing to do with our eternity. The second thing we have to look at here is this. There are a lot of teachers out there. And even in my notes, I put quotes on that, teachers, right? That will try to tell you that the Lord wants you to be financially blessed, aka rich. And some who even say that if we aren't financially blessed, then we aren't really living for the Lord. But that's not what we find, right? The Apostle Paul talks about many nights where he went hungry. Many times where he had nothing but the clothes on his own back. But he never found himself thinking in those times that he was less than blessed of God. In fact, he says that those things helped to teach him to be content in any and every situation. Whether he had a lot or a little, he learned contentment through that. But rather, Jesus says, though we are poor and afflicted, we are rich. Not in money, but rich in love, in blessing, in fellowship. I've seen poor churches and I've seen rich churches. Now, this is purely anecdotal. This is not scientific research. But I have seen a lot more blessing, a lot more love and fellowship in poor churches than I've seen in rich. And sometimes I think that it's because those who are poor have learned to value what they have. And those who have much tend to overlook the value of those things that they have. When you're poor and you have one car and it breaks down, you have no second car. When you're rich and you have 3 or 4 cars and one breaks down, well, you send it to the mechanic and you drive one of your other cars. You don't really value the vehicles because, I've got more. I can get more. Even if I don't have more, I can easily get more because I have money. He says, I know of your afflictions and your poverty. So we talked about poverty, right? But what about afflictions? Are we living afflicted lives? Because affliction, it seems, comes when we live faithfully. Because affliction is a direct result of the preaching of the true gospel. That there is sin in the world, that each of us is a sinner, that each of us are in need of salvation, and that salvation is only available through Jesus. Now, we've gotten away in the church in America from, not everyone. I'm making a general statement here, and we all know that generalities are not always true of everybody. But by and large, we've gotten away from the preaching of sin and need of salvation, much to our detriment and much to the detriment of others. You see, because what happens is that we've lost the fact that if we preach the truth of the gospel, people aren't going to like it. And we tend to not want to confront people with the gospel. In fact, we very often tend to be the least confrontational people out there, at least on the things that matter, right? Because we don't mind confronting over someone changing the curtains and putting up a color of curtain in church that we don't like. But we're not willing to confront too often each other or the people in the world over sin and their need of a Savior. You see, this message is offensive to the world. And if we're living cushy lives where no one ever really gets mad at us, we're probably not sharing that offensive message of the gospel with people. Because when you take a stand for Christ, people will dislike you. It's true. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying the fact that it is true makes it any easier for us to swallow, but it's true nonetheless. If we are standing for Christ, people will dislike us. And it even tells us that in John 1. That the light came into the world and people despised it, for they loved the darkness. See, the light of Christ will always display those areas in our lives and the lives of the people around us when we preach the gospel. It will always display openly things that we don't want to see or that they don't want to see. And sometimes they will despise us for it. Yet it's not ours to worry about. Jesus says, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Now, he says that to Smyrna, and he's talking about a specific event that church was going to undergo. But he might as well be saying the same thing to us. If we're living for Christ, we will suffer. People will dislike us. But Jesus says, be faithful even to the point of death. See, this is what's a little harder for us to swallow. Are we willing to really lay it down for Christ? To really give up our comfy, cozy houses and maybe even jobs, maybe even churches, to reach people for Him. Be faithful even to the point of death, because the one who is victorious will not be hurt by the second death. You see, when we live faithful lives, we don't have to worry about hell and all of those ramifications. And in fact, if we live faithfully and we're leading others to Christ, we don't need to worry about others on their behalf. You see, the church at Smyrna is one of two churches that don't have a rebuke because they were living faithfully. Even though they had nothing, Even though they didn't even have a good name in their community, they were faithful. They were faithful to Jesus. They were faithful to the message. And so they didn't have to fear. I speak to so many Christians who are afraid. They're afraid for our country in the direction that we're going. They're afraid for what's going on in the world today. Well, we don't need to fear, brothers and sisters, because we know the one who holds all of it in his hands, and he is faithful. Trust him. He has a plan. Look, if this message has blessed you today, we would just ask that, would you hit the like button? Would you maybe leave us a comment? Let us know how it's affected you. Would you consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and sharing this across Facebook? Share it with your friends. Send it in a text message. Send it on Facebook Messenger. Let others know that they might see the truth of what we're called to be as believers. Thank you. Have a great day. God bless.